Right, we are back on PALS TV with PALS TV's very own runner-up in the Cheesy Joke contest. If you guys didn't get to see that, we had a wonderful head-to-head joke contest yesterday where I think Professor Phil really held his own, got me to laugh once or twice, and I think I did the same. But we're back with one of the other longest running segments that we have on PALS TV is our book club. And we've recently switched books. We're in one of my favorite series, Sherlock Holmes. And so I know we've been doing a lot of character development and learning about, Sherlock and Watson and their relationship together. And they've moved in together, and they have some really odd things that they do in that apartment. I know Sherlock was doing some chemistry, and so I'm excited to see what we learn about them today and what happens. So, are you there, Professor Phil? Can you hear us? Okay.
I'm ready to go. I think it's a pretty good recap by Jonah there, and I don't really have anything to add. But since I just saw it in the chat, hello, Natasha. We'll get right into it. They're in the middle of conversation, and Sherlock is just about to explain what it is he does with his life so that Watson and we as the readers will know all this. I suppose the one big thing that Joan touched on, but let me get a thing. Nobody really knows yet what Sherlock does because he's taking courses at school, but he's just taking a bunch of stuff nobody gets. And nobody's been able to explain that yet. So now we're going to see what it is. Even though we know, because it's been 100 years since this was written. So off we go. During the first week or so, we had no callers. And I'd begun to think that my companions were as friendless a man as I was myself. So nobody came, particularly at this time. In England, like here in the 50s, and very much not like here today, people just go around and visit each other. They didn't have TV or anything, so what you did for entertainment was visit your friends. But as you recall, Watson has been out of the country for a long time. He's been sick, and this is not where he's from. So he doesn't know anybody in town. So nobody has come by, and he figures, well, I guess Sherlock doesn't really know anybody either. Presently, however, I found that he had many acquaintances, and those in the most different classes of society. So Sherlock does know a lot of people, as Watson is coming to find out. And he knows rich people and very poor people and people that work and people that have fancy professions, like Watson himself is a doctor. So that would be up with doctors and lawyers and legislatures, things like that. Very much at this time, these were people that didn't really need to work all the time. They had enough of an income that they could just stop working and they could maintain a house with servants for quite some time. It's what they called the middle class, which is not what we mean by it. But what they mean is somebody wealthy enough that they don't really need a job. And generally, you would stick with your own class of people. If you're a lawyer, you're not going to go hang out with the bricklayer. But what we're finding out is that Sherlock does. He hangs out with everybody. There was one little sallow, rat-faced, dark-eyed fellow who's introduced to me as Mr. Lestrade, who came three or four times in a single week. So the way that Watson is describing Lestrade here, he probably sounds like a thief. Or some kind of guy in a bit of a conspiracy. He's up to no good if he looks like that. Again, at that time, they were very much, the way you look is the way you are. Not true, but that's what they thought. And Doyle more than most. One morning, a young girl called, fashionably dressed, and stayed for half an hour or more. The same afternoon, brought a gray-headed, seedy visitor, looking like a Jew peddler, who appeared to me to be much excited. It was closely followed by a slipshod elderly woman. And again, these are people from all parts of society, and you wouldn't normally see, like, say, a party together. They all seem to know Sherlock and come to visit him. On another occasion, an old white-haired gentleman had an interview with my companion, and on another, a railway porter in his velveteen uniform. When any of these nondescript individuals put in an appearance, Sherlock Holmes used to beg for the use of the sitting room, and I would retire to my bedroom. I said, all these people, they come in, and he meets with them privately. He's not introducing them to Watson as his friends and saying we should all hang out together. He said, just hang out someplace else. Let me talk to them privately. He always apologized to me for putting me to this inconvenience. I have to use this room as a place of business, he said, and these people are my clients. So Sherlock saying, no, don't worry that I'm not introducing people, and I hate to throw you out of your own room in your own house, but this is my work. I'm actually doing a job, and this is the people I'm talking to. Let me check that. Oh, yep. Again, I had an opportunity of asking him a point-blank question, and again my delicacy prevented me from forcing another man to confide in me. I imagined at the time that he had some strong reason for not alluding to it, but he soon dispelled the idea by coming round to the subject of his own accord. So Watson's still wondering what it is that Sherlock does, but he said, that would be prying, and I don't want to get, too into his business, so I'm definitely not going to ask. And he assumes that Sherlock's just being very private about what he does and isn't going to tell him. But as it happens, Sherlock tells him on his own without even asking. It was upon the 4th of March, as I have good reason to remember, that I rose somewhat earlier than usual and found that Sherlock Holmes had not yet finished his breakfast. You'll recall that Sherlock usually eats quite early and is gone out of the way before Watson ever gets up. They hardly see each other during the day, if Sherlock's out and about. The landlady had become so accustomed to my late habits that my place had not been laid, nor my coffee prepared. With the unreasonable petulance of mankind, I rang the bell and gave a curt intimation that I was ready. Then I picked up a magazine from the table and attempted to while away the time with it, while my companion munched silently at his toast. One of the articles had a pencil mark at the heading, and I naturally began to run my eye through it. So they're not doing their own cooking and cleaning and stuff. Like pretty much everyone else at the time, they've got servants. And for them, it's just the landlady. She's also their housekeeper and will make some of their food, usually the quite simple things. They're not expected to do it for themselves. They might do a little lunch, maybe some toasted cheese of an evening, but that's about it. So he's sitting and waiting because he's not going to make his own coffee. And he says, oh, there's a magazine here. And he picks it up, and one of the things is marked. So he starts looking through it just to give himself something to do while he's waiting on his coffee. Its somewhat ambitious title was The Book of Life, and attempted to show how much an observant man might learn by an accurate and systematic examination of all that came in his way. It struck me as being a remarkable mixture of shrewdness and of absurdity. I said, so this article is about, if you look around, pay attention, you can know all kinds of stuff as long as you pay attention in the right way. And Watson thinks, oh, there's a lot of good stuff in here, but a lot of it is also just ridiculous and can't be true. The reasoning was close and intense, but the deductions appeared to me to be far-fetched and exaggerated. The writer claimed by a momentary expression, a twitch of muscle or a glance of an eye, to fathom a man's inmost thoughts. Deceit, according to him, was an impossibility in the case of one trained to observation and analysis. There are a lot of good points in this article, says Watson, but the article says you just see the tiniest little thing, and that will tell you everything you possibly need to know. And nobody could possibly lie to you if you observe well. His conclusions were as infallible as so many propositions of Euclid. So startling would his results appear to the uninitiated, that unless they learned the processes by which he had arrived, then they might well consider him as a necromancer. They said, look, the author's saying, if you do this observation right, you will always be correct on everything. But it's so difficult to do this and observe this well and know the right things that people are going to think it's magic. From a drop of water, said the writer, a logician could infer the possibility of an Atlantic or a Niagara without having seen or heard of one or the other. So all life is a great chain, the nature of which is known whenever we are shown a single link of it. And there's, all you need to do is see a tiny, tiny little thing, and you can know all sorts of big things. You got a glass of water, even if you don't know that there's an ocean. You say, well, if there's a glass of water, there could definitely be an ocean. Like all other arts, the science of deduction analysis is one which can only be acquired by long and patient study, nor is life long enough to allow any mortal to attain the highest possible perfection in it, before turning to those moral and mental aspects of the matter which present the greatest difficulties. Let the inquirer begin by mastering more elementary problems. Let him, on meeting a fellow mortal, learn at a glance to distinguish the history of the man and the trade or profession to which he belongs. So the author of this article is saying, you know, if you really want to be able to do this, it's really difficult and you got to know a bunch of stuff. The way to start is when you see a stranger, you figure out what their job is and what their entire history is, and know everything about their life just from looking at somebody once, which seems a little difficult. Puerile as such an exercise may seem, it sharpens the faculties of observation and teaches one where to look and what to look for. By a man's fingernails, by his coat sleeve, by his boot, by his trouser knees, by the callosities of his forefinger and thumb, by his expression, by his shirt cuffs. By each of these things, a man's calling is plainly revealed. That all united should fail to enlighten the competent inquirer in any case is almost inconceivable. The author is saying, look, it seems really simple. Just know everything about a person by one look at him. But that's how you train yourself, because you can tell everything about somebody when you look at him, says this author. Says, you just look at somebody's hands. From my hands, for instance, let's do a quick example. My hands don't have a bunch of calluses on them. They're not rough. My fingernails are usually not dirty. If my hands are dirty at all, they're usually covered in ink. So certainly this author would say that I am not a laboring person. I don't work with my hands and like construction or anything. And I'm probably some sort of person that deals with writing a lot, a clerk or a banker or a teacher, academic, whatever. What ineffable twaddle, I cried, slapping the magazine down on the table. I never read such rubbish in my life. What is it? Asked Sherlock Holmes. So Watson shouts out, oh, this is a bunch of nonsense. This magazine article is ridiculous. And Sherlock says, what are you talking about? What are you reading there? Why, this article, I said, pointing at it with my egg spoon as I sat down to my breakfast. I see that you have read it since you have marked it. I don't deny that it is smartly written. It irritates me, though. So Watson says, yeah, I've been reading this, and I can see that you've read it because you've marked on it, and somebody has, and we're the only two here. And it's really well written, but there's just something wrong with it. It is evidently the theory of some armchair lounger who evolves all these neat little paradoxes in the seclusion of his own study. It is not practical. I should like to see him clap down in a third-class carriage on the Underground and ask to give the trades of all his fellow travelers. I would lay 1,000 to 1 against it. So Watson says, this guy has this great idea that you can just look at tiny little things and know all this stuff, but that's ridiculous. Nobody can do that. You can do that if you're just sitting around and just make it up in your head, but not in real life. And I'll bet that if I really grabbed this person and took him out to do it, they wouldn't be able to. You would lose your money, Sherlock Holmes remarked calmly. As for the article, I wrote it myself. You? So Sherlock says, oh, yeah, you can definitely do that. I know you can do that. I'm the guy that wrote the article. I do it all the time. And Watson is surprised that it's Sherlock that did this. Sherlock seems a quite intelligent person. Yes, I have a turn for both observation and deduction. The theories which I have expressed there, and which appear to you to be so chimerical, are really extremely practical. So practical that I depend upon them for my bread and cheese. And how? I asked involuntarily. So Sherlock says, yeah, I know you think it's ridiculous, but it definitely works. And not only does it work, I actually make a living with it. And that's how I keep myself fed and pay the rent on this place. How can you possibly use these theories to make money? Well, I have a trade of my own. I suppose I am the only one in the world. I'm a consulting detective, if you can understand what that is. Here in London, we have lots of government detectives and lots of private ones. I says, I'm this new job that nobody's ever heard of because I just made it up myself, called a consulting detective. There are detectives that work for the police, and then you've got private investigators that are detectives, and I'm different from those. When these fellows are at fault, they come to me, and I manage to put them on the right scent. They lay all the evidence before me, and I'm generally able, by the help of my knowledge of the history of crime, to set them straight. There's a strong family resemblance about misdeeds, and if you have all the details of 1,000 at your finger ends, it is odd that you can't unravel the 1,001st. So, yeah. So all these police officers and all these private investigators, sometimes they get stuck and can't figure out the cases they're working on. So they come and tell me what's going on. And, I've read a lot about crime and nobody does anything really different. So I just say, well, this is pretty much like this other thing. This is what it is. And then they're able to figure it out after I tell them how. Lestrade is a well-known detective. He got himself into a fog recently over a forgery case. And that was what brought him here. So the little pinch-faced guy that looks like a thief or a conspirator, he says, oh, he's a detective, in fact. And, there was a forgery case and he couldn't get through it. Somebody's been signing people's names that he shouldn't. And he came to Sherlock to figure out what was going on. And these other people, all these different people that have been coming in, Watson had no idea why they would all come to Sherlock, so he's asking about them. They're mostly sent on by private inquiry agencies. They're all people who are in trouble about something and want a little enlightening. I listen to their story, they listen to my comments, and then I pocket my fee. Sherlock says, well, all these other people, they're usually not police detectives, but private investigators who get stuck, they send their clients right to me. And they tell me about the case, and I tell them what the solution is, and then they pay me. And I never go anywhere. What do you mean to say? I said. Without leaving your room, you can unravel some knot which other men can make nothing of, although they have seen every detail for themselves. So Watson's very confused, because Sherlock is saying that he just sits in his room and listens, and then he figures it all out. He doesn't even go out and look anything. And all these other professional detectives who make this their lives, they're on there and they see everybody and talk to everybody. They can't figure it out. Watson is amazed that Sherlock can. Or perhaps not so much amazed as doesn't really believe him. Quite so. I have a kind of intuition that way. Now and again, a case turns up which is a little more complex. Then I have to bustle about and see things with my own eyes. Sherlock says, yeah, I pretty much just sit here and listen to stories. Every once in a while, something's really weird, and I got to go out and look at some stuff. But yeah, then I get it. You see, I have a lot of special knowledge, which I apply to the problem, and which facilitates matters wonderfully. Those rules of deduction laid down in that article which arouse your scorn are invaluable to me in private, practical work. Observation with me is second nature. You appeared to be surprised when I told you on our first meeting that you had come from Afghanistan. Well, you were told, no doubt. So Sherlock has said, yeah, all this stuff that I study, it all helps me with this. And I use all this stuff, and that's how it all works. It's just what I do automatically. Don't even think about it. You remember that I said you were from Afghanistan when you met me at the hospital. Of course, Watson had asked his friend if somebody had told him stuff, and he was confused about that, but never got an answer. And so Watson assumed somebody definitely told you, right, Sherlock? Nothing of the sort. I knew you came from Afghanistan. From long habit, the train of thoughts ran so swiftly through my mind that I arrived at the conclusion without being conscious of intermediate steps. Sherlock is saying, no, nobody told me. I just knew it. I didn't even think about it because I think about this stuff all the time and I do it over and over again. So it just came to me and I didn't even piece through and figure out what it was. I just knew. This is generally what we mean when we talk about intuition. It's not that something pops up in your head and you just magically know things. It's that you've reasoned it through in your head and figured it out so fast that you don't even see those processes working. Happens for all of us. rather more complex for Sherlock. There were such steps, however. It's not that I just came out of this nowhere. I definitely thought through it. I just didn't notice it when I was doing it. The train of reasoning ran. Here was a gentleman of a medical type, but with the air of a military man. Clearly an army doctor then. I said, well, I definitely know you're a doctor just by looking at you. You can tell that. And you look like you were military. So, as you know, people in the military, they tend to have a certain type and look. Pretty much anybody in the military knows everybody else in the military just looking at him. So since he knows he's a doctor, knows he's military, he must be an army doctor. He's just come from the tropics, for his face is dark, and that is not the natural tint of his skin, for his wrists are fair. Well, he's got a tan, and it's not that he's normally that dark on his skin, because his wrist, where his sleeves come up, which had been covered in the sun, they're still pretty pale. So he's been out in the sun in some place where there's a lot of sun. There's not a lot of sun in England. So he would have been down south. He's undergone hardship and sickness, as his haggard face says clearly. His left arm has been injured. He holds it in a stiff and unnatural manner. Well, this guy's been sick. You can see that, he's pale, or well, not pale. He's thin, and his cheeks are all sunken. He's not been eating well. Looks sick. His arm, well, you remember Watson got shot. That's all hurt, and he holds it, how you limp, or if you hurt your hand, you hold it kind of funny so you don't bump into anything. So he noticed that Watson is doing that. Where in the tropics could an English army doctor have seen so much hardship and got his arm wounded? Clearly in Afghanistan. The whole train of thought did not occupy a second. I then remarked that you came from Afghanistan, and you were astonished. I said, well, there's only one place where all those things could happen and be together, given what I knew about you. You were definitely in Afghanistan, where there was a war. And so I told you that, and you seemed surprised by it. It is simple enough as you explain it, I said, smiling. You remind me of Edgar Allan Poe's Dupin. I had no idea that such individuals did exist outside of stories. He said, oh, I suppose that makes sense once you say it all like that. Yeah. You seem like this storybook detective. Edgar Allan Poe, who we know mostly for kind of creepy poems and stories, is also the author of the very first detective novel and detective series. There were series of novels with Auguste Dupin. And so Watson is saying, hey, you remind me of this really famous fictional detective. Sherlock Holmes rose and lit his pipe. No doubt you think that you are complimenting me and comparing me to Dupin, he observed. Now, in my opinion, Dupin was a very inferior fellow. I know you're trying to be nice here, but that storybook detective, no, I don't think he was a very good detective at all. That trick of his, of breaking in on his friend's thoughts, was an apropos remark after a quarter-hour's silence. Is really very showy and superficial. He had some analytical genius, no doubt, but it was by no means such a phenomenon as Poe appeared to imagine. Yeah, that's really just storybook, and it's just fancy stuff. And there's some good reasoning in there, but even as a character, not that great a detective. Have you read Gaboriau's works, I asked. Does Lecoq come up to your idea of a detective? I said, what about this other storybook detective? Do you like this one? Sherlock Holmes sniffed sardonically. Lecoq was a miserable bungler, he said in an angry voice. He had only one thing to recommend him, and that was his energy. No, that one, he's awful. He's not a good detective. He gets out and does a lot of stuff, but he's not a good detective. That book made me positively ill. The question was how to identify an unknown prisoner. I could have done it in 24 hours. Lecoq took 6 months or so. It might be made a textbook for detectives to teach them what to avoid. No, I would have done that so much better. I know they just made it up and they already knew the answers in the story before they even started. Even then, I would have done better. I felt rather indignant at having two characters whom I admired treated in this cavalier style. I walked over to the window and stood looking out into the busy street. This fellow may be very clever, I said to myself, but he is certainly very conceited. Watson says, I really like these stories. You're just running them down. You might be smart. He doesn't say this to Sherlock. He says it to himself. Sherlock guy might be smart, but he is full of himself. He's very arrogant. There are no crimes and no criminals in these days, he said querulously. What is the use in having brains in our profession? And Sherlock goes on and says, look, there's just nothing exciting in the field. Nobody's doing anything really interesting that makes a detective really work. I don't even know why I should be as smart as I am. Wouldn't need to be to solve these crimes. I know well that I have it in me to make my name famous. No man lives or has ever lived who has brought the same amount of study and of natural talent to the detection of crime which I have done. What is the result? There's no crime to detect, or at most, some bungling villainy with a motive so transparent that even a Scotland Yard official can see through it. Sherlock says, look, I've done all this work, and I could be great. Nobody has worked as hard to be a great detective as I have, and nobody is as naturally talented. I could do this without even the work and still be great, but I put in the work, so I'm super great. But there aren't any good mysteries, so what am I going to do with my life? I was still annoyed at his bumptious style of conversation. I thought it best to change the topic. So, as with many of us, Watson just thinks that Sherlock's sitting here bragging, and he doesn't want to hear somebody brag about themselves. It's not a very pleasant topic of conversation. That's very often true here. I find it very true myself. At that time in England, that is extremely true. It's still true in England, very much more so than it is here. But back then, you did not talk about yourself to make yourself look good. That other people talk nice about you. You don't do it about yourself. I wonder what that fellow is looking for, I asked, pointing to a stalwart, plainly dressed individual who's walking slowly down the other side of the street, looking anxiously at the numbers. He had a large blue envelope in his hand, was evidently the bearer of a message. So Watson is let's talk about something else so I don't have to listen to this. And he sees a guy walking down the street trying to deliver something. And he says, oh, yeah, I wonder what that guy's trying to deliver. Who's he looking for? You mean the retired sergeant of Marines, said Sherlock Holmes. Bragging bounce, thought on myself. He knows that I cannot verify his guess. So Sherlock is showing off again. He says, this is how I do it. And says, oh, yeah, that guy, he used to be in the Marines. He's a retired sergeant. And Watson thinks to himself, there's no way he knows that. And he's just trying to make himself look good by saying this because there's no way I can possibly find out one way or the other. Because I got way down in the street looking for stuff, and I'm not going to run down a couple flights of stairs and go ask. The thought had hardly passed my mind when the man whom we were watching caught sight of the number on our door and ran rapidly across the roadway. We heard a loud knock, a deep voice below, and heavy steps ascending the stair. So, fortuitously, I suppose, while Watson's thinking, well, I can't possibly figure this out, and the guy bearing the message, the messenger, shall we say, comes on across, knocks on their door, and comes up to their rooms. For Mr. Sherlock Holmes, he said, stepping into the room and handing him my friend the letter. As it turns out, this message that the messengers bring is for Sherlock. Here was an opportunity of taking the conceit out of him. He'd little thought of this when he made that random shot. May I ask, my lad, I said in the blandest voice, what your trade may be? Watson thinks, I got this Sherlock guy now. He didn't know the guy was going to come here, and I can figure out he's probably not really a retired Marine. So Watson goes ahead and asks the guy, what is it that you do? Commissionaire, sir, he said gruffly. Uniform away from repairs. He says, I work for the military. I do some business type stuff, clerk stuff, and that administration. Normally they would wear uniforms, but he's not in one right now. My uniform's getting fixed. That's why I'm not in it. And you were, I asked, with a slightly malicious glance at my companion. Then since Sherlock said that he was a retired Marine sergeant, he says, what did you used to do? Sergeant, sir. Royal Marine Light Infantry, sir. No answer? Right, sir. He clicked his heels together, raised his hand in a salute, and was gone. And the guy says, yeah, I was a sergeant in the Royal Marines. So, as it turns out, Sherlock was right. And then the messenger, former sergeant, takes off. I confess that I was considerably startled by this fresh proof of the practical nature of my companion's theories. My respect for his powers of analysis increased wondrously. There still remained some lurking suspicion in my mind, however. The whole thing was a prearranged episode, intended to dazzle me, though what earthly object he could have in taking me in was past my comprehension. Oh, that's amazing, thinks Watson. I guess he really can do it, except maybe it's possible that this is just a setup, and he paid that guy to come here so he could say that. But yeah, I don't know why he would do that. It just doesn't seem to make any sense why he would bother doing that. When I looked at him, he had finished reading the note, and his eyes had assumed the vacant, lackluster expression, which showed mental abstraction. So he looks over at Sherlock, and he's not paying attention. Sherlock's just staring off into space, which means he's thinking really hard. How in the world did you deduce that? I asked. Deduce what? Said he petulantly. Why, that he was a retired sergeant in the Marines. Watson says, hey, how'd you figure out he was a sergeant? I've no time for trifles, he asked her brusquely. Then, with a smile, excuse my rudeness. You broke the thread of my thoughts, but perhaps it is as well. So you were actually not able to see that the man was a sergeant in the Marines? No, indeed. So Sherlock says, can't be bothering with you. I'm busy. Can't answer your questions. No. Wait, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be so rude. But I'm surprised that you didn't know he was a sergeant in the Marines right off. Did you not? I said, no. I did not know that. It was easier to know it than to explain why I knew it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty. You were quite sure of the fact. I said, look, I can explain it to you, but that's kind of a long, difficult process in the explaining. And I just knew, just looking, I picked all these things up and knew right away. It was much quicker. Just like doing a simple math problem. You can't explain why that is, unless you're a professional mathematician, they know. But you know it's true. You know that 2 is more than 1. But if you try and explain how that is, that's tough to do. Even across the street, I could see a great blue anchor tattooed on the back of the fellow's hand. That smacked of the sea. So when Sherlock looked out the window, on the guy's hand, he had an anchor tattoo. If you got an anchor tattoo, you're probably some sort of naval thing. On a boat of some sort, whether you would be in the Navy, the Marines, Customs and Revenue at the time was their Coast Guard, I believe. Or you were just a merchant marine and you were on that. I know we were revenue cutters at the beginning, or you were. He had a military carriage, however, and regulation side whiskers. There we have the Marine. Well, he walks like somebody who was in the military, holds himself that way with his shoulders back and walks in, and his sideburns come down to the proper area. So we know he's a Marine. Now, these days, that might not help so much with military because your sailors are going to walk and have that same haircut. That was very much not true of that place. Sailors are still kind of sloppy today, but they were really sloppy back then. They were good at their jobs, but when it came up to a Marine, it was not that kind of thing. He was a man with some amount of self-importance and a certain air of command. You must have observed the way in which he held his head and swung his cane. Steady, respectable, middle-aged man, too, on the face of him. All facts which led me to believe that he had been a sergeant. Well, I figured out his rank because he looked like he was somebody in charge of people. Looked like he was in charge of himself, and if somebody was put under him in a position, then he would be fine with it. And he's about the right age to have been a sergeant. Wonderful, I ejaculated. Commonplace, said Holmes, though I thought from his expression that he was pleased at my evident surprise and admiration. So Watson is amazed. Oh, that's great. And Sherlock says, that's not a big deal at all. But, yeah, he looks like, yeah, thanks for noticing. I said just now that there were no criminals. It appears that I am wrong. Look at this. He threw me over the note which the commissaire had brought. Sherlock says, I was just complaining. There ain't good crimes, and my talents are wasted. But, hey, check out this note that the guy just brought. Why, I cried as I cast my eye over it. This is terrible. It does seem to be a little out of the common, he remarked calmly. Would you mind reading it to me aloud? This is the letter which I read to him. Watson looks it over and says, oh, this is just an awful crime. And Sherlock says, yeah, it's a little weird. You might help if you read it to me instead of me reading it. So Watson proceeds to read, and this is what he reads. My dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes, there's been a bad business during the night at 3 Lauriston Gardens off the Brixton Road. Our man on the beat saw a light there about 2 in the morning, and as the house was an empty one, suspected something was amiss. So, in this letter, they said, hey, something bad went down at this house. There was a cop walking by, saw a light in a house that was supposed to be empty. He found the door open, and in the front room, which is bare of furniture, discovered the body of a gentleman, well dressed and having cards in his pocket, bearing the name of Enoch J. Drebber, Cleveland, Ohio, USA. So, there's an American in London, apparently, well, the corpse of one, a dead one, in this empty room, in this empty house. And cop finds his dead body. And he's got cards that tell you who he is. Not like your ID cards or your license. These would be calling cards. They put your name and usually a bit about you, what your job is, and where you're from. So that we talked earlier about people visiting each other for entertainment back then. But since everybody was visiting each other, very often when you went over to visit somebody, they would be out visiting somebody else. So all you would do was take one of your visiting cards and leave it with the servant, butler, maid, whoever was there. And that way, the person you visited know that you went by. There are a lot of stories from that time of people never actually visiting each other. They just walk around and leave their visiting cards because everybody's out, and you just make a circle, and everybody misses everybody. But it does let you know who this guy was. There'd been no robbery, nor is there any evidence as to how the man met his death. There are marks of blood in the room, but there's no wound upon his person. It doesn't look like he was robbed. He's still got everything on him. And we don't know how he died. There's blood around the place, but it doesn't look like it came from him because he doesn't seem to be hurt, except for being dead. We were at a loss as to how he came into the empty house, indeed. The whole affair is a puzzler. If you can come round to the house any time before 12, you will find me there. So the author of this letter is saying, we don't have any idea why he's in there or how he died or anything. So if you would come around this morning, that'd be great. I'll be there waiting for you. I've left everything in statu quo until I hear from you. If you are unable to come, I shall give you fuller details and would esteem it a great kindness if you would favor me with your opinion. Yours faithfully, Tobias Gregson. So the person writing the letter says, look, I've left everything in this house just exactly the way it is. So if you come by, we haven't touched or moved anything, you'll see it just as it is. But if you can't make it, I'm going to swing by and I'll let you know everything I've found out and other stuff that I know that I didn't bother to put in this letter. Please help. Gregson is the smartest of the Scotland Yarders, my friend remarked. He and Lestrade are the pick of a bad lot. They're both quick and energetic, conventional, shockingly so. This guy that's writing the letter, He's probably the best in Scotland Yard. Him and the Lestrade guy that we were talking about earlier. They do a lot of work. They try really hard, but they just do it in the same way everybody else does. They have their knives into one another, too. They're as jealous as a pair of professional beauties. There'll be some fun over this case if they're both put on the scent. Sherlock says, yeah, they're both the best there, but they got this professional rivalry. Each of them wants to be the very best. So if they both get onto this, they're going to be fighting each other to solve it quick. I was amazed at the calm way in which he rippled on. Surely there's not a moment to be lost, I cried. Shall I go and order you a cab? Watson says, what are you so relaxed about everything for? There's a dead body there. We got to go and help. Yeah, I'll go get a cab for you. And remember this time, not a cab car. This is one, maybe two horse cab. I'm not sure about whether I shall go. I'm the most incurably lazy devil that ever stood in shoe leather. That is, when the fit is on me, for I can be spry enough at times. Why is just such a chance as you have been longing for? Sherlock says, you know, I don't really feel like getting up that much. I don't like to do a whole lot of stuff. When I'm excited, I'll run around. But I'm not sure I'm even going to bother. Watson says, you've just been complaining that there's no good mystery. Here's a mystery. Let's jump in on this one. My dear fellow, what does it matter to me? Supposing I unravel the whole matter, you can be sure that Gregson, Lestrade and Company will pocket all the credit. That comes of being an unofficial personage. But he begs you to help him. Sherlock says, yeah, I could help him, but, you know, the police are just going to take all the credit when I figure out the mystery. I won't get anything out of it. Watson says, but the police really need you to help. Yes, he knows that I am his superior and acknowledges it to me. He would cut his tongue out before he would own it to any third person. However, we may as well go and have a look. I shall work it out on my own hook. I may have a laugh at them if nothing else. Come on. Sherlock says, yeah, he's asking me to help him because he knows I'm better than he is. But he's not going to tell anybody else, so I'll never be known, and I won't get famous for it. But, hey, let's go down, look at it anyway. I'll figure it out, and while they're trying to figure it out, I'm just going to laugh at them because I'll already know. Well, let's go. He hustled on his overcoat, bustled about in a way that showed an energetic fit and superseded the apathetic one. That's your hat, he said. You wish me to come? Yes, if you have nothing better to do. A minute later, we were both in a hansom, driving furiously for the Brixton Road. So, just said he was lazy, but Sherlock said, hey, we're getting up. Grabs his coat and says, come on, let's go. We're going to go solve this mystery. Juan says, you what, made it come along on this mystery? Just, what else are you going to do? You're sitting around here being sick the whole time. Let's go. So they jump in the cab and they take off to go solve the mystery without the Scooby Gang, but it seems like they would right now. And we are pretty close to our time here, so right before they get to where they're going, let's go ahead and knock that one off.
Well, they're finally off. I know we've been learning about what Sherlock, you know, what his little tendencies are and all that stuff. So it's exciting to finally see him put it in action. So any other questions for Phil about Sherlock before we go to break? Oh, we have Gila has a question. Let's see. What's your question, Gila?
I my answer is that I really love. I love you.
Oh, we love you too, Gila.
So we're gonna hold a week.
We'll see you soon, and we can hang out here for now. We'll see you soon. We'll all get to.
Okay, I'm gonna have a week.
Yeah, I
Hang
know,
in
it's
there,
real
Gila.
tough. I've been stuck at home lately too. It can be real tough.
Right.
At least we have this.
Oh my God! I just gotta go on.
All right.
And yeah, everyone hang in there. I know that we're not getting out as much as we we hoped, but feel free to come here as often as need be. And that actually concludes our lunch session. So in the spirit of socializing, I'll let you guys take yourselves off mute, talk amongst yourselves. We'll be back at the top of the hour with the last segment. So we'll see you guys soon. Thank you, Phil.
Guys.